Hey everyone, how's it going? So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different with this video. I'm going to be going through my top 10 picks from the new set, Phyrexia All Will Be One. Apologies, I've had a bit of a cold for the last couple of days, so I might sound a little bit nasally, but you may have spotted we got the full spoiler for the set published. I think it was yesterday, so I wanted to get this recorded as soon as possible so we could have a chat about the cards that I'm excited for and that other people might want to consider playing too. So this is a personal list. I think it's a combination of cards that are objectively quite powerful in these formats. You know, I've seen other people talking about them as potential cards that we'll see play, and then some personal ones that I'm just looking forward to playing. I think this set is very sweet. From seeing the full spoiler, I think there's going to be a big impact on formats like Explorer, and which I'm really excited for. So let's make a start with some honourable mentions before we get into the full top 10. So the first one here is Archfiend of the Dross, which is a 4-mana 6/6 flying in black that enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove an oil counter from it, and then if it has no oil counters on it, you lose the game. Okay, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. So this is an interesting one. I'm not convinced it's going to be great, but that 6/6 flying for 4 plus the ability to make your opponent lose 2 life every time one of their creatures dies makes me think that if you can land this and maybe follow it up with something like the Meat Hook Massacre, take out 2-3 of their creatures and then attack, suddenly your opponent's on a very fast clock and maybe those 4 turns don't matter quite so much. So that's one I think I'm going to put in the maybe pile. Another card is Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler, which is a Planeswalker, 3 loyalty, 3 mana, and it has a static that you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste, and then its +1 is untap up to 1 target creature, and it's -2, mill 3 cards, and then you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I'm quite excited to try this in Golgari Elves, which is a deck that I played on a video just a few days ago. So I think this slots in quite nicely. Not only does it let you, say, activate your Circle of Dreams Druid the turn they come into play, giving you lots of mana, but also it's a kind of card advantage as well, allowing you to return your elves from the graveyard to the battlefield and potentially use the ability of them more than once. Then the next card is Swords of Forge and Frontier, which is the 9th, I believe, card in the Sword cycle that started way back in the original Mirrodin. So like all swords, it's 3 mana to play and 2 to equip, and it gives the equipped creature +2/+2 and protection from red and green. And this one says, whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. You may play an additional land this turn. So I'm not convinced that swords are actually good in constructed formats anymore. I think the power level of cards may have moved past them, but this is the first sword to be legal in Explorer or Pioneer, so I think it's definitely worth playing. And you know, those protection colours, red and green, well, both those colours are very strong in the formats, so I think it's worth giving it a go, and it is, you know, it's just very exciting to see a sword, so I've given that one an honourable mention too. And then the other 3 are cyborg cards, which I think will see some play. So I didn't put them in the main list just because I wanted to kind of keep that for cards which I'm excited to play in main decks. But Cankerbloom is a 1 and a green for a 3/2 Phyrexian fungus, and it has 1 sacrifice it to either destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or proliferate. So creatures that have the ability to destroy artifacts or enchantments do often see sideboard play. I think it's Outland Liberator already sees sideboard play in the format, and this is just an improved version of that. It's a higher power, and it comes with the ability to proliferate as well if you really want to. The next one is Minor Misstep, which is a card that's made a bit of a splash and people have been talking about. So it's a 1 mana instant that says counter target spell with mana value 1 or less. Now actually, I think this card is probably better in older formats than Pioneer and Explorer, perhaps Modern, where it can counter a lot of the kind of the big threats in that format, which cost 1 mana. Less so Pioneer, less so Explorer, that the kind of the big things are 1 mana, but you know, there's Thoughtseize, always, that's a very powerful card, so I wouldn't rule it out, and it may well find its way into some sideboards at some point. And the final honourable mention we have is Soulless Jailer, which is a 2 mana artifact creature, and it's an 0/4, and it says permanent card cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield, and players can't cast non-creature spells from graveyards or exile. So classic graveyard hate, but in colourless, which is always good, and a kind of defensive body as well. So I think this one may well replace some of the other graveyard hate that you see in your decks. So those are the honourable mentions. So let's get on to the main 10 cards that I've picked out. So, coming in at number 10, we have Jace the Perfected Mind. So this is a mythic legendary planeswalker that costs 2, a blue, and then a blue Phyrexian mana. So for those who don't know, a Phyrexian mana can be paid either using a mana of that colour or with 2 life. And he's a 5 loyalty planeswalker with completed. So if you do pay the life instead of the additional mana, the planeswalker enters with 2 fewer loyalty counters. He has a +1 until your next turn. Up to 1 target creature gets -3, -0. -2, target player mills 3 cards. Then if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3 cards. Otherwise, you draw a card. And then -X, target player mills 3 times X cards. So I've seen a lot of people very disappointed in this card, given that it's a mythic and that it's Jace. And to be honest, I agree with them. This is a very weak card in a vacuum. I don't think it's going to be very good in standard. It's probably good in limited, just because milling 15 cards from your opponent is pretty great. But, you know, for kind of this completed Jace, this kind of big moment in the story, it's pretty disappointing. However, I am excited to try a mill deck in the format, and I think this will slot in very nicely with that. Being able to mill 15 cards from your opponent on turn 4 will be pretty powerful, and when you combine it with cards like Tasha's Hideous Laughter, I think there may be some viability for creating a mill deck in the format, perhaps in blue-black, where you can take advantage of Thoughtseize, Drown in the Lock, and other things which kind of disrupt your opponent as well while you're doing the mill strategy. And I think the -2 in particular will come in handy later in the game when you have your opponents kind of milled quite a lot. They've got 20 cards in their graveyard, and suddenly you can draw 3, refuel, and kind of carry on. So yeah, not a good card on its own, but I think exciting to play in potentially a deck in the format. So number 9, we have Green Sun's Twilight. So this is a green and X for a sorcery at rare. You reveal the top X +1 cards of your library, choose a creature and or land card from among them, put those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is 5 or more, instead put the chosen cards onto the battlefield or into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library. So in Explorer, we don't currently have Call of Calling, and I think this is the closest equivalent that you're going to get to essentially tutoring up a green creature. Later in the game, if you play this for 5 or 6, you are pretty much going to hit something that you want, and also you might even get a land out of it. And also it has that added flexibility that you can play it turn 1, turn 2, and it's kind of a cheap cantrip. You know, potentially, if you get lucky, 1 and a green, you might get to draw 2 cards, you know, if you hit a creature and a land. So I think this is very exciting. Green tutors are always powerful. It's not quite go and search your library for anything you want, but you know, for a big mana cost, it can essentially become that. Maybe being a sorcery makes it a bit weaker than Chord of Calling, but I'm definitely excited to try this out in some green decks, particularly ones where you're looking for specific answers and pieces. So at number 8, we have another green card. So this is Venerated Rot Priest. So that is a 1 mana, 1 green, 1/2 Phyrexian Druid at rare, and it has Toxic 1. So when it deals combat damage to a player, they also get a poison counter. And whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So this is an early game play, 1 mana, and it synergizes very well with Proliferate and other poison generators. But I think the kind of exciting bit of this is the second ability about generating more poison counters. So red-white heroic, where you kind of target your own creatures with spells and make them more powerful, is a deck in Explorer, and I think you might be able to create a variant of this where essentially you're targeting your creatures with cheap spells like you know, God's Willing and kind of cantrips which pump them. And this will allow you to kind of poison out your opponent potentially, and also, you know, it has that added advantage that if your opponent starts targeting your stuff as well with spot removal, then they also get poison counters. So this, again, I think this is one which has a lot of potential. It might be too vulnerable, it might not see a huge amount of play, but I am excited to maybe give it a go and try and build a deck around it where you're basically playing this early, giving your opponent poison counters, and then just kind of trying to go off by targeting your own things with spells. So we'll see how that does. Number 7, we have a reprint, an old favourite, which is Phyrexian Obliterator. So that is a 4 black mana for a 5/5 Phyrexian horror, a mythic. It has trample, and it says whenever a source deals damage to Phyrexian Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents, which reads incredibly powerfully. Now, this card has never actually been particularly great. You may remember, if you've been playing Magic a long time, when they first spoiled this card way back when, people were going nuts for it and, how powerful it was, and then they spoiled Dismember a few days later and everyone realised, oh, actually, it's got the Dies to Doomblade problem. However, I am excited to try this in one particular deck in Explorer, and that is Mono Black Devotion, which I've played on the channel a couple of times now. And I think this is a potentially very powerful threat in that deck, not only because if it sticks around, it's basically 5/5 unblockable, but you play this on turn 4, and if it sticks, you immediately go into Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and you're draining your opponent for 6, regardless of what regardless of what else you have on the battlefield. So 6+, and I think that's a very good interaction. So I'm excited to try a version of that which plays Phyrexian Obliterator. It has a lot of competition for the 4-drops spot in black. It's got to compete with Shieldred, which is one of the most powerful cards printed in recent times. So it might struggle to see play outside of dedicated decks, but it certainly reads very powerfully, and I think its white counterpart is also similarly very good, the Phyrexian Vindicator, and they both completely hose mono red. It's it's embarrassing, kind of just how much those decks struggle against this kind of card. So let's see how that does as well. So at number 6, we have Ossification, and I'm fairly confident in saying that this is going to see play. So that is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura, and it enchants a basic land you control, and when Ossification enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Ossification leaves the battlefield. So this is one of the most powerful Oblivion Ring effects for its mana cost of all time. It's quite similar to a card that's in Pioneer but not in Explorer, and that is Chain to the Rocks, which exiles any one creature for 1 white mana, but has to be enchanted on a mountain you control. So it does have some key differences. Obviously, this is 2 mana. That is a big difference. Having a 1 mana removal spell is always great, but this doesn't force you to have to play red. All you have to do is play basic lands, which most decks do. So I think, and it also hits planeswalkers, which is a very important distinction. So I think this card's obviously going to be great in Standard, great in Limited. I think it will see play in Explorer or Pioneer, and I'm certainly going to try and make it. So, moving into the top half of our list now, at number 5, we have Sulfin, Mayhem Dominus. So that is for 2 and 2 red for a 5/4 legendary Phyrexian horror, a mythic. So it's one of the Dominus cycle. There's one in each colour. And it says, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead, and then you can pay 1 and 2 red Phyrexian mana and discard 2 cards to put an indestructible counter on the Mayhem Dominus. So the Dominuses are interesting. In many ways, they are very clearly designed for Commander, and I think they vary in strength in those formats. I think the white one is clearly the best one in Commander, but I am excited to play this one in particular because I think it's a potential replacement for Torbran in mono red. So it does a similar effect. So Torbran, if you remember, increases all of the damage of your red spells and permanents by 2, and this one simply increases all of the non-combat damage by, it doubles it. So they are slightly different. They're good in different ways. So you would kind of tend to construct your deck based on which one was kind of better in that particular case. So for this one, you'd be playing a lot of kind of non-combat damage spells like your lightning strikes, your skewer the critics, that kind of thing. But if you can get it to stick and its ability to become indestructible does help you do that, then I think it can be an incredibly powerful threat. In red, it has the same mana cost as Torbran. It has better stats. Now, to make it indestructible, if you are discarding 2 cards, that is potentially a heavy cost in red. Red does very much rely on its kind of cards that it draws. It doesn't have a huge amount of card draw, so it does have to kind of make the most of every card that it has. But I think the effect on this is potentially so good that it kind of makes up for that. So yeah, I'm going to try this in mono red, perhaps red-white aggro, when we get a bit more of that in kind of the Pioneer variant. But take, for example, Eidolon of the Great Revel. Suddenly, when your opponent plays a creature with, or any card with mana cost 3 or less, it's doing 4 damage to them, and it's only doing 2 damage to you. So it suddenly becomes even more unbalanced in the sense that Eidolon is even better than it normally is. So that's very exciting. So I'm looking forward to trying that. At number 4, we have a bit of a spicy one. I'm not sure if this is going to be good particularly, but, we'll give it a go. And that is Argentum Mastercore. So that is a 5-mana artifact creature, Phyrexian Mastercore. It's a 5/5, and it has first strike and protection from multicolored. And at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you discard a card. Okay? Doesn't seem great, but when you discard a card this way, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the mana value of the discarded card. So, this is an interesting one. It has very competitive stats. It is one of the few creatures that can tussle with Shieldred in combat and survive, because it has 5 power and first strike, so it gets around Shieldred's death touch. It's very hard to kill in the sense that protection from multicolor is not insignificant. There are some multicolor removal spells in the format, particularly I'm thinking more in Pioneer here with things like Dreadbore can't target this. And its drawback, in inverted commas, turns all of your cards into removal spells. So I think there is a lot of potential here. Ultimately, it might be too slow. 5 mana is a lot, even though it does have those kind of aggressive stats, and maybe you don't want to be discarding your cards, but it can slot into any deck. It's it doesn't have a color, so I think it's worth giving a try, and I'm excited to try it. It might not work, but what's the point of having an Explorer channel if you can't explore how things are going to work out? So yeah, that's definitely one I'm looking forward to giving a go. At number 3, we have Dark Slick Shores. Actually, what I mean by this is the entire cycle of allied coloured fast lands. So we have Sea Chrome Coast for blue-white, we have Copperline Gorge for red-green, Razor Verge Thicket for white-green, Black Cleave Cliffs for black-red, and then this one, Dark Slick Shores for blue-black. So these are fast, early mana accelerators. Essentially, if these are among the first 3 lands that you play, they come into play untapped. And we see in Pioneer and Explorer, we already have the enemy cycle of these lands, the enemy color cycle that were in Kaladesh, and they see a lot of play in various decks. Anything that has even a remotely low to the ground curve will play these. They even go as far back and see Modern play, and I think these are great. They enhance a number of existing decks in the format. Rakdos is definitely going to play the black-red one. Gruul aggro, Gruul vehicles is going to want the red-green one. So I think these are going to be great. Pick them up as soon as you can. Use your wild cards because they're great. And also, one very important thing is that for Pioneer and Explorer, initially when these formats came out, there was an imbalance between the ally-coloured lands and the enemy-coloured lands. The enemy-coloured lands were better. You just had more options. You had both the pain lands and the fast lands in the format, but the ally colours didn't. So there was a bias towards playing enemy colours that existed for quite a while. With the printing of the pain lands in Dominaria and Brothers War, and now these allied coloured fast lands, that there is now parity between those. So I think you will see these played a lot. I'm looking forward to adding the blue-white one to my Spirits deck in Pioneer. So yeah, I think just get hold of these because it's a very, very good land cycle and it will see a lot of play. Okay, number 2, we have a personal favourite of mine, and a ludicrously powerful card, which seems to happen whenever they print this particular character. But we have the Eternal Wanderer, which is a legendary planeswalker without a type, because she is the Wanderer, and it costs 4 white for a 5 loyalty planeswalker, and it has the static ability that no more than one creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. So basically it comes with inbuilt protection for itself, and then +1, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. That's a very important clause we'll come back to. And then 0, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike, and -4 for each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. So I should say up front that 6 mana is a lot in a format like Explorer or Pioneer, so that is potentially a prohibitive mana cost. But the abilities on this card are absurdly powerful. I mean, creating a double strike without having to lose any loyalty is good by itself. That +1, you can either use it to blink your own cards and kind of re-trigger the enter the battlefield effects, or if you want to clear your opponent's blockers out the way, or just stop them using a creature, because if you blink one of your opponent's creatures, it doesn't come back until the end of their turn, so they can't even attack with it or anything like that, or use its abilities. And then its -4 is just a pseudo Wrath that you can immediately activate, keeping your best creature and getting rid of all but their worst creature. And on top of that, the Planeswalker also then sticks around with its static ability that makes it so hard to get rid of. So there's a lot of power in this card. I'm particularly looking forward to playing it in this Panharmonicon Elish Norn deck that I think is going to be good, to kind of have another blink effect. But there's just, just a lot going on here. High mana cost, as I say, but very, very powerful card, and a great character. The Wandering Emperor is one of the best planeswalkers printed in recent times, and this at rare, it's just very, very good, and I can't wait to see what kind of damage it does to people. And I think if someone plays this against you in limited, you're basically screwed. So really good, great card. And so finally, at number 1, who else? I know it's a boring choice in many ways, but we have the mother of machines herself, Elish Norn, a 4/7 legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, for 4 and a white. She has Vigilance and the abilities: if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, and permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. So where do you start with this card? So it is incredibly aggressively costed, 4 and a white. It's not even kind of prohibitively white. You could splash this card if you wanted to, for a 4/7 with Vigilance, so it can hold up the ground pretty effectively. It's going to be able to block forever. And it's good in any deck with Enter the Battlefield theme or sub-theme. So I mentioned earlier about Panharmonicon, so this deck's going to kind of slot right in there as copy 5 through 8 of Panharmonicon. But crucially, it doesn't... Panharmonicon, which is the 4-mana artifact that doubles your Enter the Battlefield triggers, crucially has the drawback that you essentially take turn 4 off to cast it, and then you're hoping that on turn 5 its ability can kind of, when you play more creatures, can catch you back up. Elish Norn does not have that problem, because yes, it doesn't technically do anything when it enters the battlefield, but it's a 4/7 that's going to stop your opponent's creatures getting through and is a kind of must answer. I don't know if anyone saw the recent episode of Game Nights where they played this card as one of the commanders, and it just wrecked everybody, particularly that second ability, which I think is undervalued. Maybe it is more powerful in Commander, but just turning off all of your opponent's Enter the Battlefield abilities is going to be incredibly powerful. Their ossifications won't work because they won't trigger when they enter the battlefield. Anything that has a Reflector Mage, that's not going to work. So don't underestimate that second clause as well as the first one. So I can't wait to play this in Panharmonicon. I think it's going to be incredibly powerful. And yeah, that is our number 1. So let me know what you think in the comments. So we've kind of done a whirlwind tour through my kind of top 10 here. I didn't want to kind of linger too much so that people can kind of watch this in a short amount of time. But yeah, let me know what you think. Comment. Is there anything I've missed? I'm sure there is. People are still looking through the set, working out the interactions. So as I say, this is a bit of a personal list, just cards that I'm excited to play. But I'm sure I've missed something. So do let me know in the comments if there's anything you've seen that you're like, yes, this is going to see it. This is going to make a splash. I really want to play this. So yeah, let's get a bit of a discussion going. And yeah, just over a week until the set releases. It's looking so good. Let's see how it does when it finally comes out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.